Thanks, Chair, and thanks to all of the contributions so far. Just to start, I suppose the first question is for the Minister. Just you mentioned in your opening statement about the demand side, the 15%, I think, voluntary. Could you outline how you view that? I mean, lots of European countries have already published ideas that they have around how they're going to reach those reductions in demand, but I don't think we've seen anything really from the Irish government around what it is and how it's going to be communicated to industry and to households. The other issue is around, and some have already touched on it, the EU market redesign, and I do appreciate now that there seems to be a shift in government position in favour of reform of the decoupling of gas and renewables, because in June, Minister, you told my colleague, Deputy Rose Conway, that you didn't support dismantling the investment regulatory and market system. So I think it is important now that there's been a shift and that we are going to see a reform of the market, because certainly the coupling of gas with renewables is punishing households. What I want to bring up, though, as well, and maybe it's for all of the three stakeholders that we have here today, is just around the RES auctions. And in March this year, I had flagged concerns that were being heard from various stakeholders that the RES auction, we have the highest renewable energy costs in the EU. I think at that stage they were around €90, and we were flagging that we were concerned about the new RES auction. We were given reassurances by stakeholders at that meeting. Don't worry, it's a competitive process and it will deliver. What we did see instead was, I think it's now up around 150 megawatts is the RES, so it's more expensive than it was before for renewable energy. So Minister, maybe for yourself, just has there been any thought given to that call for the task force to address what are the concerns around why we have the highest renewable energy costs in the EU? And then, and just on this, because this is really important, I think what people need to know is that we're paying more on our bills now because that RES auction has delivered higher renewable energy prices, because my understanding is that the PSO will now go into negative in October because of the way that the market is regulated in the EU. And if we had delivered renewable energy at an even lower cost, households would be getting a bigger return on that, because those renewable energy and the RES projects would be paying more back into it. So it's really, really important that we address what are the fundamental issues with the RES auction that is resulting in Ireland having the highest renewable energy costs.
Okay.
Sorry.
I've given others latitude. If you want to ask another question, go ahead.
So it's just then on the CRU. In the Energy Poverty Strategy of 2019, you were asked to carry out an analysis of what were the barriers to switching. And I know that regularly the CRU will say that the best way to reduce your household bill is to switch supplier. We know Age Action and other organisations will tell you, MABS, the traveller organisations, that there are significant barriers. Was that analysis carried out? And if not, why not? And then the other issues, because currently 63% of people don't change supplier. And the other thing is just, would you look at, if we're not going to address those barriers, at least doing away with the default tariff, which penalises people who stay with the same supplier?
Okay, thanks, Senator. Minister.
Firstly, we've asked Gas Networks Ireland and CRU to come back to our steering group, our emergency planning, with the exact further measures. But I also think I think the measures in public consultation at the moment from CRU on time of day pricing is a really good example as to how we can manage demand and have flexible demand management to help us through this incredibly difficult period. Just with regard to the Renewable Energy Support Scheme, the RES scheme, as you said. Firstly, to mark a number of changes which I think are important. We have introduced a new scheme where there's effectively a cap on what can go up to, which wasn't there previously. I think that was an important development in terms of improving the market. You're correct. I would like to have seen, I would expect to have seen somewhat lower prices. In answering the question, why is it that our prices were higher than we possibly had expected? A variety of reasons. Well, firstly, the world is in a very difficult global supply chain situation, cost of steel, and other supply constraints. But the primary reason, in my mind, my assessment of it, is that the curtailment and the constraints that we apply to renewables now, because of a lack of grid connectivity, is one of the biggest challenges. And I'll be honest, I think that's a political issue for all of us, because we know ourselves in the last decade that despite the best efforts of EirGrid and ESB, it's been very difficult to build out grid. It's not an easy or popular thing to kind of support or promote. But if we don't have good, strong grid connectivity and the ability to get that through the planning system, that's going to have knock-on consequences for economic development, for our protecting people from fuel poverty. I think EirGrid did done a good job in their shaping our electricity future, which I think in terms of public consultation, I've said consistently is exemplary in terms of how we're going to start to change that narrative, change that story. They're coming back with a further revised Reshaping Europe. I think it'll take into account what we've seen in the recent RES auctions, and we'll have to start locating both generation and demand in areas which support the grid, so we minimise the need to have to build out that grid. But if I was to cite one constraint and one difficulty we have, I think it's the ability for us, what Jim Gannon said there earlier on, to get through the planning system some of the grid connections that we might want to do is our biggest problem in that regard.
Okay, and Ms. McAvilly.
Thank you. Yes, so we have conducted over time a number of analyses of barriers to switching because it is a really important area. Some of the key measures that we have introduced to enhance switching activity, because what we found through some of the behavioural surveys that we did is customers find it confusing. So how do we make it simple? And also they forget, so how do we give them reminders at the right times? So the measures we introduced include what's called the estimated annual bill. So when we talk about, advertising, for instance, of new offers or supplier discounts and so on, they also have to include the estimated annual bill. So with this discount, it would cost, let's say, probably now up to €2,000 per annum, versus so that somebody can easily compare that offer with another offer from another supplier that might be expressed in slightly different terms, but then the estimated annual bill is calculated at €2,100. So, you can tell quite easily what the difference is in cost arising from those two tariffs. So it's easier to compare. We also introduced a requirement on suppliers to provide a 30-day notification in advance of the end of a termination of an offer, so that customers would be reminded in time to look around, shop around, and they're given information in that notification. It's a separate letter. It's not just in a bill. It's a separate letter or communication by email or whatever the customer prefers. And then we also introduced, again, a separate letter or communication, an annual prompt. So if a customer, as you say, has been on a default tariff for a while, that they would get a prompt from their supplier saying, we see you've been on that tariff for a while, there may be better value, why don't you look at these options? So it's just to kind of get past that. We also conduct annual surveys where we try and understand what are the barriers to switching. People who do it find it easy, but we do think there's still maybe not enough activity in that space. So we also conduct communications campaigns. So we've launched a CRU switching campaign that we would ramp up and down. We did see very significant switching activity at different times. Earlier this year, for example, we saw some of the highest switching rates that we'd seen for some time. So it is something that we constantly monitor and will take action where we can support customers. I'll just finish if that's okay. Yeah. But just on those on the default tariffs. So part of the package of protection measures, we haven't published the full package, but we are requiring all suppliers to put what we call their retention offers available to customers on websites, so the customers are aware suppliers do offer value for loyal customers, and just make it clearer that they can ask for that and get onto it. And also for those on financial hardship prepayment meters, a new requirement that they get the best available tariff from suppliers. So just to try and redress that balance that you mentioned.
It's more just around the people who don't want to do direct debit, and a lot of older people really have an issue around being forced to take out direct debits and are then blocked from swapping, or people who have a poor credit rating are stuck with their supplier. So how do we address those barriers for people, because they are more likely to be the more vulnerable households?
Yeah, I mean, it is simply the case that suppliers offer discount for direct debit, and they're entitled to do it where there is a genuine cost saving for them. But yes, how do we support those households? There isn't a barrier, it's not prohibited for a customer in debt to switch, but there is a debt flag. And that's something that we introduced after much discussion with the agencies, our customer stakeholder group, because it wasn't helping customers to debt hop. They ended up leaving a trail of debt behind them that was still being pursued. So it was a challenge for those customers. So it's really about how do you help the customers in debt to pay down the debt. So there's, obligations on suppliers around how they manage that with customers. It is a challenging situation. It'll probably be more challenging for more households than ever this year. So debt repayment plans that work for customers for longer periods, supporting them if it is the right option with prepayment meters and so on. So, yeah, look, we're looking at all of those options to try and support those. And
Okay, I'm going to move it along, Ms McVilly, but I do think it's a very important question Senator Boylan raises. And if you agree, Senator Boylan, we might ask Ms McVilly to revert with some proposals
and
around
also just
those particular
that
cohorts.
analysis that was done would be really helpful for the committee, I think.
Yeah, is that okay, Ms McVilly, that you'd come back and elaborate on proposals for those particular cohorts, those who aren't switching onto direct debits, and how they might be protected as well?
to do that now? Or
No, in writing, if you could. Or like Senator Boylan, if you want to.
I can
think it's
draft up
very
a list of questions, yeah. So it's just that analysis that was requested of, it was CEO after the 2019 Energy Poverty Strategy, looking at the barriers to switching and then what proposals.
Of the analysis that we've done and some of the work that we've done.
That'd be
since
great.
then.
Thanks.
Okay.